How are you guys doing today? This is Z-Town Train, and this is another little extra for the Just a Basic Dude vlog. We're gonna do a little bit of shortening of that name in the titles, I believe. I think that I'm going to turn it into kind of an acronym. We're just gonna put JaBDV in the title. Anyway, today's video I wanted to talk about knives. It's an important tool, not just in your survival situations or your what we talk about sometimes here on the vlog with cheap gear and reviews and things like that. But I've got a few knives here, which are part of the amount of knives that I own. I don't own hundreds of knives or something crazy, and I don't spend a ton of money on knives, but I think that they're a very important tool that everyone needs to have. I carry a pocket knife on me all the time. I have for years, ever since one day I wanted to cut open a bale of hay, and I didn't have a pocket knife. And my grandfather showed me a trick to cutting open a bale of hay, where you take another piece of twine and slip it under the twine that's holding your hay bale together, and use the friction to cut through the string. But I thought, you know, how utterly inconvenient is that when my hands are cold and trying to find another piece of twine. And you know, we didn't just leave them lying around, and we tried to clean everything up and keep everything nice there. But anyway, so knives. There are a couple of different kinds of pocket knives that you can own. There are your regular Slipjoint knives, which is just your basic pocket knife. There are Lockback knives, which have a locking mechanism with a small place to put your thumb on the back of the knife and detach and unlock that knife's mechanism and close it. There are liner lock knives, which I do not have an example of because I don't like to use liner lock knives. I like to use lockback knives or slip joint knives, generally speaking, when I'm using a folding knife. And there are also fixed blade knives, which are your big hunting knives or your bushcraft knives or things of that nature. And so I thought that we'd take a look at a couple of mine today. There's one here. I'm going to take my fancy new mitts off. I was just trying to get my hands warmed up because it's cold up here. And when I find that as I'm getting older, that when my hands get cold, they tend to cramp and get stiff, and they don't want to work. I don't know how that works for anybody watching this, but my knuckles get stiff and my hands start to hurt, and then they don't work as well in the cold. So the older I get, the more often I use gloves. Anyhow, so I thought we'd take a look at a few things. Here's one. This is what looks like a two-bladed knife, but really it's a knife with an extra tool on it. This is an Italian military surplus pocket knife that I got from sportsmansguide.com. It's like $5 there. If you go online, there's a lot of places you can buy these, but a lot of times they're rusted out. This came in without any rust on it. Very nice, actually. And I like it. It has a very interesting blade on it. It's not like a drop tip knife blade. It's got a very straight cutting edge on it, and that's nice. This is an example of a slip joint knife. So it does not have a locking mechanism per se, but when you open it, the tension on the spring in the back will hold the knife open so that you can't shut it. And the other tool that is on this is actually a can opener. And I'm going to look into, I've been meaning to research this, but I think that you could also use this, you know, kind of as a fork. I would use it as a fork to eat with after I'd opened my food with it. It's a very interesting knife to me. It's not made cheaply, as cheap as you would think for a military knife of that time period, of the World War II time period in Italy. The steel blanks that they use are very, very thick. And it's got this nice kind of handy lanyard hoop on here. And a lot of these slip joint knives that don't have clips on them that go into your pocket, you'll find that there's a lot of them with this handy lanyard loop. And that is great. You can tie something to it so that when you put this into your pocket, you can have the lanyard hanging out. And that way it's easier to get your knife out and use it, because it's a tool. You're going to want to be able to get to this and use it. So we're going to put that down. This knife is one that I got from my wife. She was not my wife yet when she bought it for me. It was at least 11 years ago. It was 11 years ago on Christmas, and she bought me a small tin, like a collector's tin of pocket knives. One of them was a Lockback, one was a small three-bladed stockman's knife, and the other was this pocket knife here, and they're from the Remington Company. This knife I've carried in my pocket for years and years and years, and recently put it away. This is another Slipjoint knife. The springs on this aren't as tight as on the other one because I've used and used and used this knife. You can see from the marks on the blade that this has actually been sharpened multiple times and used. It's actually getting this one's getting kind of thin, this blade here, because I've sharpened it and used it. This is a made in China knife. Remington doesn't generally have made in America knives, but it's actually, for a knife that was made in China, it's very nice. It was a great gift, and this was my favorite of the set, so this is the one that I carried for years. Moving on, there are other ones here. So this knife is the one that I've probably had the longest out of everything that I've owned. This is a Gerber 600 in camo. This is a Lockback knife. This is an example of a Lockback knife. So if you look at that tensioner spring that we talked about in the back of the knife, on this one has a locking mechanism so that when you open this blade, this snaps out and it presses against the back of the blade right here, and it locks everything into place. You can't really move this very easily. This is an older knife. I've had this for probably 17 years now, 16 or 17 years. A very good friend of mine, when I worked at the livestock sales yard here in the Central Valley, when I worked at the livestock sales yard, I did not have a coat one day. And in fact, for a while I didn't have a coat. I was wearing a lot of sweaters and it was freezing cold outside. And a very good friend of mine's wife actually gave me a coat, and this was in the pocket. And I went and I asked them, what about this? This was in the pocket of the coat. And they said, keep it. No, it was in there. We wanted to give it to you. It was very nice. And so this is my old reliable knife. This is the one that I carried for years and years and years in my back pocket. And recently it's kind of moved into my backpack because it is super thick, if you'll notice. Super thick. And it kind of wears a hole in my back pocket where I like to keep it. But it's this is my reliable knife. This is the one that my go-to for years. This was my go-to, and it's my favorite Lockback knife. This was made prior to Fiskars and Gerber coming together, and so this was made in Portland in the United States. It's a good knife. I don't think they make the Gerber 600 anymore, and I especially don't think they make it in camo. I'm not too sure. But when I looked into it, and they were about a $60 knife, which is nothing to sneeze at back, 20 years ago. Nowadays, $60 isn't so much when you look at the price of things like Benchmade knives and stuff like that. But I like it a lot, and it's never broken or let me down. So it's a fine example of a Lockback knife. Now, one time though, I let the knife down. I lost it. And so when I lost it, I was in, I believe it was a hardware store, and I needed another knife because I'm so used to carrying one. And oh, this is a liner lock knife. Imagine that. I had forgotten about that. This is the reason I don't like liner lock knives. So I bought this Schrade knife. Now this used to, if you'll notice, this used to have, if you can see through the screw holes, this used to have a clip. It used to be a clip knife, but I don't like clip knives that have the clip at the top because I'm left-handed. I don't like having to pull it out, turn it around, and open it. Now I can open pretty handily with one hand left-handed, even though the opening knurl, this little knurled knob here, is on the other side of the knife. But then I have to switch over. This is why I don't like liner lock knives, is because I can either turn it backwards and have the cutting blade directly toward my hand when I close that knife, when I'm using it one-handed, or I actually have to switch to my right hand in order to use the liner lock properly. And so it's very rare that you'll ever see me with a liner lock knife. Now this was made after the Schrade company kind of lost some of its quality control. It's super thick. It's very heavy metal, but it does not hold an edge very well. I've sharpened it and sharpened it, and it just does not hold an edge well. If you'll notice, I kind of have a way of opening knives with my left hand, where I pinch this right here and open it. So, but then in order to close the liner lock, I have to switch, or I have to have it pointed with that blade back toward my hand, so it's not very good for a left-handed person, in my opinion. You can practice and practice, and I have. Another thing I don't like about this charade knife, and you can buy a lot of these in different places now. I saw one just like this in an auto parts store. I don't like the scales on this. Those are what these little outside plates are called, or scales. And this one, the scales are very slick. I don't like them. Anyway, so sometimes I've carried this, but usually this is kind of relegated to more of a toolbox or tackle box knife these days. Now this next knife is my current everyday carry. This I got from my son for Christmas. It is a Buck 715. It is a special color that was only sold at Walmart Supercenters. My son got this for me. He is 7 now, so he was 6 when he bought this for me. And he bought this last Christmas, and I really like it very much. It holds a knife, it holds an edge very well. I like that it, instead of having a knob, it has this kind of hole, this notch in the blade, so that you can open it left-handed like that. But generally speaking, I still sort of open it the same way I always have, and just pinch it between my fingers and pull it out. This is a lockback knife. A lot of these, like that you find now, more modern knives, are those liner locks. And the reason that I kept the clip on this and actually used the clip is because the clip is at the bottom, what would be considered the bottom of the knife instead of the top. So at the bottom of the handle. So that when this knife comes out, it's in your hand like this, and boom, there it is. With it at the top, you'd pinch it and pull it out this way and open it. But this one, just, it's out and it's there, and it's very useful. And I always have some kind of pocket knife, but usually if it's this knife that I keep in my pocket. Now this last knife that I'm going to talk about is a really special one to me. This is our example of a fixed blade knife, but this is a really special fixed blade knife. So this came from my grandfather, and this, a lot of people see this and they see the shape and things and they think, oh, it's a K-bar. No, it's definitely not a K-bar. You can tell from the colors on the handle. This is made by Schrade. It's Schrade Walden, New York, is what you'll find here. This is a Schrade H15. Some of these were made for military use. Some of them were made for civilian, to sell to civilians as a hunting knife. He had bought this one. He told me that he got this knife in 1956. And my grandfather was in the Navy for more than 20 years. I can't recall now exactly how many years. But before he passed away, he had me, I do a little bit of leather work, and I'll show you that on the channel one of these days. But I do a little bit of leather work, and he had asked me to make a sheath for this. And so I took the knife, and I was making the sheath, and then he got very, very ill and went to the hospital. And when he came out of the hospital, I was still working on the sheath, and I told him, I'm working on the sheath, and he told me, he was like, I'd really like you to keep that knife. He's like, if you would, he said, you can hang on to that for me. And that's what he said, hey, why don't you just hang on to that? And so I've kept it, and this is the knife that I have from my grandfather. And so it's actually something that I rarely use. Sometimes I'll throw it in my backpack just when I'm feeling like a big fixed blade knife might be useful. I haven't used it a lot, so I don't know exactly how well it'll work, but I can say that he sharpened it prior to giving it to me. It is very sharp, and that it has a nice oval-shaped handle. It feels good in your hand. It hits a lot of points in your hand when you have it in your hand, and I like it very much. Anyhow, so what's the point in all this? A knife is a tool. A lot of people look at knives in other parts of the world as being nothing but a weapon, and especially in many places in Europe, lockback knives and big fixed blade knives are illegal now. I'm fortunate enough to live in the United States where we can carry things like knives and have permits for firearms and things like that, and these are all tools. These aren't the first consideration when I pull a knife out of my pocket to use for cutting a piece of rope or string, or slicing something, or opening a package, or cutting a piece of wood or stick, or whittling something, or I don't know, anything. Name multiple uses for knives. The first thing that I think of when I pull this out is not stabbing people. I'm not, I suppose that any knife could be used for that, but there are lots of tools that could be used for that. You could stab someone with a screwdriver, and it happens all the time. Anyway, I just wanted to show you guys some of the knives that I have here. This is a little bit longer than the review videos that I've been making. We're going to do lots of more of those short form reviews, but this one is a little bit longer form video. Just wanted to show you guys. It was kind of a show off video, and I wanted to talk about knives today. So slip joint knives, liner lock knives, and lockback knives. And if you're left-handed, I recommend a lockback knife. Alright, this has been Z-Town Train and the Just a Basic Dude vlog, and I am out. Peace.